So we are going to be moving on. Quick reminder how it's going to work. There is going to be a QR code. Just scan it, ask your questions, and I'm going to be the voice of you in order to answer them, or to ask them in this case. So we are going to be moving forward. Yes. And next up, we are going to talk about different practical insights for startups to work with corporates, innovation, and growing a business, well, in general. And we are going to have the head of innovation and product strategy from JPMorgan Chase, Lisa Besserman, joining us on the stage. A round of applause to Lisa.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you. So, please. All right. I see that as of right now, I don't have yet any questions prepared from the audience to you. No worries, there's still time. And of course, feel free to also raise a hand if you want to ask it that way. But before we do that, just a starter, for the people who didn't manage to go to your stage when you gave the talk just a little while ago, so what are some of the key practical things you would like to give to the audience regarding this?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a step back and just explain a little bit more about my role at JPMorgan Chase. So my team, I'm the head of innovation. I'm focused on Chase operations. So I look across all of operations. So a lot of people think, oh, it's just fintech, but it's a lot more than fintech. So we're looking at cybersecurity startups. We're looking at data startups. We're looking at authentication startups. We're looking at employee experience and knowledge management and background noise cancellation and optical character recognition technology. So it runs the gamut of the type of startups that we're interested in integrating into the bank. And so essentially what my team does is the innovation team. We look at all of operations and all of the different products within Chase, and we say, where are the problems? Or where are the emerging technologies that there are opportunities for us to become customers of? And then once we understand what the problems are, because I tell my team, be obsessed with problems. It's all about the problem, not the solution. For me, I want to be problem obsessed. I want the founders that we work with to be obsessed with the problem. It's fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And so essentially what we do is once we recognize there's a problem, we'll then go to the market and find what startups are doing great things that could solve those problems for us. And then we'll go through rigorous testing internally to evaluate the technology. We put it through tech testing. We put it through proof of concepts and pilots. We do our due diligence. We understand your financials and your runway because we want to make sure that we're building a long and sustainable partnership. Also, when you're dealing with such a highly regulated industry, we have to be very careful about who we choose to partner with. So the time from when you start your pitch to a big company like JPMC to the time that you have a pilot or a proof of concept to the time at the end where you actually have a contract, if you're lucky, it's quite a long sales cycle. And so, part of the talk I just gave, and I apologize if this is redundant for anybody who's been in the talk, but essentially it's how do you get your foot in the door to meet these enterprise companies and potential customers. And one of the things I say is don't rely on LinkedIn, don't rely on spamming and cold outreach. It's something you can do, but I would not rely on that holistically as a strategy. I get tons of LinkedIn spam every day. I rarely ever read it. So what I recommend is coming to conferences like this, coming to Q&As like this, asking the questions or pitching your startup. Also, if you are venture-backed or you participated in an accelerator, leverage that network and those warm introductions. If you haven't participated in an accelerator or you don't have institutional funding, leverage your network. Everybody has a network. Coming to conferences like this, building those friendships and those networks, and then understanding who at LinkedIn is connected to that company, who could potentially make that warm introduction. That goes a long, long way versus cold outreach. So, that's one of the things I recommend in terms of getting your foot in the door. And then in terms of if you do get to the proof of concept or the pilot stage, is just be prepared for a long sales cycle, but also put your best foot forward. It's, we're evaluating many data points in terms of do we want to have a partnership with you, do we want to have a relationship with you, and a lot of that happens at the proof of concept stage, and a lot of that happens at the pilot stage, because we're not just evaluating the technology, and we're not just evaluating the product, but we're also evaluating the team and the people, because it's always about the people, regardless where you go, whether it's through investing or through partnerships or customers, everybody, it's all about the people.
Okay, thank you so much. So far, I haven't yet. Oh, no, there is a question. So, what's a creative example of someone who got the foot on the door or through the door?
Yeah, I have two. So one, I did a televised podcast at South by Southwest, which is a huge tech conference in the U.S. And someone was in the audience and they watched the podcast. They were a part of the audience experience. And then after the fact, they like a lot of people, they'll come up to me and chat, and they gave me a very quick 30-second pitch because they knew there was a long line of people. But the thing that they did that was really interesting, and this is also a tip I give to whenever I speak to audiences that are looking to get enterprise customers, is they started with the problem. And I'm going to keep repeating that, but because it's one thing to say my startup does X, Y, Z. We can we can do this, or we leverage this technology. It's like, okay, that's great, but like, what's in it for me? And so what this person did was, not only were they present physically at an event that I was there, and they went there for me. They went there to pitch to me, which I respected, but they started with a problem. They said, banks are facing big challenge with AI these days with deepfakes, and you used to rely on voice authentication, and you can no longer do that. So you need another layer of security, and my startup does that. My startup has a 90-something% success rate, and we can solve this problem for you that costs you this amount of billions of dollars. And I said, okay, I'm listening. So had he have framed it totally differently and just saying, I have an AI startup that does XYZ using deep language and neural networks, then I just been like, okay, that's cool. But what he did was he focused on what was in it for me, and that was the problem, and that was how much it was costing us, and he got my attention. So that was one of the most creative and thoughtful pitches. Another thing is, I have a very strong network, as most enterprise do with venture capital funds. And so it's not uncommon for one of our VC partners or friends to say, hey, I have this portfolio company, they asked for an introduction, this is what they do. And it's not just about asking for the introduction, it's about making it as simple as possible for the person who's doing the introducing. So they put together, a pitch deck, they put together a one sentence, this is the problem we're solving, this is what our technology does, and this is why you should want to talk to us. And so just having it very clear and articulate, but also focused on the problem and how that could solve a pain point for me and my customers or my employees was very thoughtful and very helpful.
Okay, thank you so much. So the next question from the audience. Which personal qualities have you relied on to get this far in your career? Was there something you lacked but developed throughout your career?
I love that question. Who asked that question? Very cool question, and I love that it came from a woman because, in my personal experience, I've always been the minority. I've either worked in tech, I've worked in venture, or I've worked in corporate finance, and those are predominantly male industries, generally people much older than me in these leadership type roles. And so I think a lot of it was first overcoming what we call imposter syndrome. It's like there's a TED Talk that I love. It's Amy Cuddy. She's a behavioral psychologist, and it's like the fake it. It's not fake it till you make it. It's fake it till you become it. And so it's really just about building that confidence if it does not come from within. And for me, being a minority, being a woman in tech, being a woman in venture, being a woman in finance, there's very limited seats at the table for people like me or people who look like me. And my personal philosophy is be so good that they have to make a seat for you at the table, or find your own table, create your own table, and that's what I did. I built my own company because I saw a problem and was really passionate and naive and foolish to think I had a solution, but got very lucky that I built a really great team around me. And so I built my own table, and then I got so good that they couldn't ignore me, and then I got invited to the other tables. But I'd say, confidence is key, especially being a woman or minority. Nobody is going to do it for you. You have to be your own biggest advocate. And, a lot of people kind of take a back seat to their own careers, thinking if you do really good work, whether it's in entrepreneurship or working at a company, good things will come to you. But the truth is you have to create your own. You have to create your own success, and you have to be your own biggest advocate, because you can't rely on other people to open up those doors for you. And sometimes you have to be like the Kool-Aid man and like burst through the walls and open your own doors, and that's okay, because in the end it matters, how far you get and what you did to get there. And so for me, it was really overcoming that. That challenge of thinking other people are going to do things for me, and just being able to do it myself, and just being unapologetically authentic, and also like leading with integrity. Like especially in industries like startup or tech, it's a big world, but it's a small community. And so as long as you lead with integrity, and you're honest and kind, and you help people when you can, and you pay it forward when you're in a position to do that, I think good things will always come to follow. But I would say, leading with integrity, but also being confident and being outspoken enough to create your own success is absolutely necessary, because nobody's going to do it for you. And that was a lesson I had to learn.
Thank you so much. And yeah, this sentiment, this is something we at Rigata Girls, as I know it seems odd, the guy with the beard, but yeah, we might want to, I might want to talk with you later on to
Sure.
invite to some events to
I love
inspire
that.
more. But yeah, moving on to the next question. Is agreeing to a pilot a requirement, or is there a point where the startup should be confident enough to ask the client to go all in from the first moment?
Not for enterprise. I mean, not all enterprise companies are created equally. When I talk about enterprise companies, I'm talking about JPMorgan, which 300,000 employees, highly regulated, $3.6 trillion of assets under management. So for us, we will not take the risk of just going directly from first conversation or sales conversations to integration, because we need to hedge that risk. We need to hedge that bet to ensure that the tech works, that the proof of concept works, that the pilot works in the environment that we set forth. So we can't just like open the floodgates and just integrate the technology. There are accelerated pilots. So for example, one of the examples I gave on stage was when COVID happened. We had our service agents, they used to work in service centers. Whenever you'd call, you'd speak with a service agent, and they're generally in the Philippines and in India, and we had infrastructure to support that, to give a really great elevated experience for our customers and for our employees. But then COVID hit, and people were working from home, but they didn't have the infrastructure, and so we started getting complaints about how it was difficult to hear them. Roosters were crowing in the background, babies were crying. It was just like this terrible customer experience. Our NPS scores went down, the employee experience was terrible. And so this was like a problem we needed to solve immediately. We didn't have 12 to 18 months, which is the general life cycle of a sales cycle, to go through all the methodologies of evaluating. And so we just needed to move very quickly, but also efficiently, and being very mindful of data and privacy and all the things that come with a very highly regulated industry. But within 1 month, we were able to stand up a pilot and a proof of concept. We were able to get the data we needed to prove that the technology worked, and then we went from 300 employees in like a controlled environment to thousands in a little over a month. So when there is a deep need, we can accelerate, but we certainly would not, at least JPMC, we would not overlook the pilot proof of concept stage, just because that's where we get the most learnings and the most data and the most security in terms of like, is this tech going to work? Is this relationship sustainable? But there are elements to expedite it if the situation calls for it, like a COVID.
All right, thank you so much. The next question, it's going to be rather long. Somebody wanted to really test my ability to read out
You guys,
loud.
I'm jet lagged. It's going to be difficult for me to remember, but we'll try.
Let's try it.
Okay.
So, since big corporations are very sensitive about data sharing and data risks, what advice you would give to startups who are used to see tons of data and metrics on their products, but then integrating with corporate partner, they have to rely on insights corporate share via slide decks, meetings, etc. Basically, have less data to work with they have used to. How to go about in situations like these?
Okay, if I can interpret that correctly, data is obviously a huge concern for all enterprise companies, especially with the data breaches and Cambridge Analytica, and you don't want to be on the news cycle for that, especially when it comes to data, because that's losing customer trust, and it takes hundreds of years or decades to build up trust and seconds to break it. So data is obviously a very sensitive topic for enterprise companies. A lot of companies have guidelines on their websites about what the minimum requirements are if you want to work with them as a supplier or as a vendor. And so I recommend looking on the website and just making sure that you have the minimum requirements that you need, and then you make concessions as needed, whether you're on-prem or you're transitioning to the cloud, whatever it might be. And your enterprise customer will tell you what they require, whether it's on-prem, and maybe the answer is you can't support that, and that's okay. It's not the customer for you, you're not the vendor for them, and that's totally fine. But there are definitely minimum viable requirements, not an MVP, but MVR, I guess, of what enterprise companies expect from their vendors and suppliers. And one of the things I said in my previous talk was you'd be surprised that a lot of them are transparent about it in terms of guidelines and policies as it relates to security or data or customer information, whatever it might be. And so for JPMC, you just go to the JPMC website and it's like about and then suppliers. And then we give like a very in-depth approach to how we evaluate and what the bare minimum is that we require. And I would say just use that as a good starting point. And then from there, it's really just about having those conversations. Because a lot of times we'll have these conversations and maybe the startups don't have the infrastructure that we need. That doesn't mean the conversation ends. It just means that the startup needs to, or if they choose to work with us, then they have to just catch up and do the minimum requirements that we have for them to be eligible partners.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So the next question, we still have time, all good. How important is it to have an internal champion at the client to back channel support or info to the startup to get a deal closed?
I don't think it's really that important. I mean, it helps, of course, but in the end, it doesn't matter if you have advocates or champions. It matters if the tech is good enough. If the tech solves a real problem, people will see the value of it. It doesn't matter if you have an internal partner or relationship. At the end of the day, it's for us, we are completely unbiased about how we're choosing technology. In fact, there are times where we might have investments in startups, because we have a separate portfolio, we have a separate, venture capital fund, and it might make sense for us to use the product. But in the end, if the product isn't the best in class and there's another product that's better, we're going to go with the other product regardless of our personal opinion about the founder or about the portfolio. So really, the product speaks for itself, as does the team. So, I think if you're a good product and you're a good team, you build those champions along the way. So the more people that know about your technology, the more people that use it, whether it's in the pilot or the proof of concept or have these interactions, the more internal champions that you'll receive because of it. And this happened recently. We had a startup. They were working with one group, completely separate from ours, because JPMC is a huge organization. There's multiple lines of business. And they were working with one group, and the product was so good that group became evangelists. And they had no vested interest in evangelizing an external product, but it was just so good that they said other groups need to be a part of this. They need to get on this platform. And then once we started working with their team, we saw the value, not only in the product, but in the people. And they were able to, and I said this during the talk as well, they were able to 10x their contract size because they showed up, because the product spoke for itself, but also the people were at the same caliber of excellence that the product was. And then you just gain evangelists and champions and sponsors along the way just by being that good.
All right, thank you so much. So we still have 2 minutes left. Is there another question from the audience? You can also feel free to raise a hand if you want to. We will give you a microphone. If not, then the final question from my side would be, why is it worthwhile for startups to work with enterprises? Why should they do that?
That's growth, right? You want to be sustainable. You don't want to rely on VC dollars. You want to be able to build a growth startup. You want to be able to evolve. You want to be able to hire the right people and make an impact in the world. And what better way to do that than to become self-sustainable? And what better way to become self-sustainable than to have really strong customer base? And then also, for me, the reason I went to JPMC, I used to work with early stage startups. I was a venture capitalist. I was a founder myself. I wanted to see what it was like on the other side in terms of growth startups and impact my corner of the world. And what better way to make an impact than through companies that have access to millions of people. And so when you're building products that can change the world, you can't do that with a very small sample size. In order to change the world, you need that scope and that scale, and what better way to do that than through enterprise partnerships.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so
for
much,
having
Lisa.
me.
Round of applause to Lisa Besserman.
Thank you so much.
So